What would your fiancé's family do if they thought you were poor? Not pretending, not joking. I mean truly believing that you barely had enough money to get by. Would they welcome you? Or would the smiles disappear the moment you walked through the door? Because that's exactly the experiment I accidentally ran the night I met my fiancé's family. And it all started with a misunderstanding I never corrected. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. My name is Vanessa Carter. I'm a single mom raising my 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. For the past year, I'd been dating Liam Whitmore. Kind, funny, the type of man who remembers your coffee order and warms up your car when it's cold outside. But there was one thing Liam believed about me that wasn't exactly true. He thought I was broke. Now, technically, I never said that. I just never told him the truth about my income. I make about $33,000 a year working as an administrative coordinator at a local nonprofit. It's not a huge salary, but it's stable. And after years of struggling when Sophie was a baby, I learned how to live carefully. I budget. I avoid debt. I buy secondhand when it makes sense. To Liam, though, that looked like poverty. He'd offer to pay for dinner. He'd insist on covering movie tickets. Sometimes he'd even say things like, "Don't worry about it. I know things are tight." And every time he said that, I just smiled and let it go. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I was curious. Then one evening, Liam said something that made my curiosity turn into a test. "My parents want to meet you," he told me. "Dinner this Friday." That's when he added something that stuck in my mind. My mom is really big on first impressions. Really big on first impressions. Those words echoed in my head for days, so I made a decision. I wouldn't correct the misunderstanding. If Liam's family believed I was poor, then I wanted to see how they treated someone they thought had nothing. And I decided to bring the one person who always notices things adults try to hide. My 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. But the moment we stepped into the Whitmore house that night, the entire room went silent. And then Sophie said something that changed everything. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt like you didn't belong? Not because anyone said anything yet, not because someone told you to leave, but because the silence said it for them. That's exactly what it felt like the moment Sophie and I stepped into the Whitmore house. The place looked like something out of a real estate magazine. High ceilings, polished wood floors, a staircase that curved like it belonged in a hotel lobby. And right in the middle of the living room stood Liam's family. His mother, Margaret Whitmore, tall, perfect posture, pearl necklace, the kind of woman who could probably judge your entire life story in 3 seconds. Next to her stood Liam's sister, Claire, arms folded, eyes moving from my shoes, to my purse, to Sophie. And his father, Robert, barely glanced up from his phone. "Mom, Dad, this is Vanessa," Liam said warmly. Margaret smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile that reaches someone's eyes. "Oh," she said slowly, "it's nice to finally meet you." Finally. Interesting word choice. Within minutes, we were sitting around their enormous dining table, and that's when the subtle questions started. At first, they sounded harmless. "So, Vanessa," Margaret asked, pouring wine into Liam's glass but skipping mine, "where did you go to college?" Before I could fully answer, Claire jumped in with another one. "And where do you live exactly?" Then Robert chuckled while cutting into his steak. "Kids are expensive these days. I don't know how young parents manage it." You see what was happening? They weren't asking questions. They were measuring me, testing me, trying to quietly calculate whether I belonged in their world. Meanwhile, Sophie sat beside me, swinging her legs under the chair, quietly observing everything. Then Margaret asked the question that changed the temperature of the entire table. "So, Vanessa, what exactly do you do for work?" I answered honestly. "I work administrative coordination for a nonprofit." Claire leaned toward Margaret and whispered something under her breath. And just like that, the energy shifted. The conversation started drifting away from me. Margaret began giving little, helpful comments about budgeting and daycare options. Claire joked about money-saving apps. And that's when Sophie suddenly looked up from her plate, completely calm, completely innocent, and she said a sentence that froze the entire room. My mommy says rich people are usually the nicest because they don't have to prove anything. The fork stopped. No one moved, and Margaret Whitmore's face changed in a way I'll never forget. But what she said next made it clear the real test had only just begun. Children have a strange ability. They say the one thing adults are trying the hardest not to hear. And the moment Sophie finished her sentence, the entire dining table froze like someone had pressed pause on the evening. My mommy says rich people are usually the nicest because they don't have to prove anything. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Claire blinked. Robert slowly lowered his glass. And Margaret Whitmore let out a tight little laugh. "Oh my," she said, forcing a smile. "Kids say the most interesting things." But the tension didn't leave the room. You could feel it sitting there between the plates. Sophie, of course, had no idea she'd just detonated a social grenade. She went right back to eating her pasta. Meanwhile, Margaret dabbed her napkin against the corner of her mouth and turned back to me with a different tone than before. Sharper now, more curious. "So, Vanessa," she said carefully, "raising a child on your own must be financially challenging." There it was. Not a question, a statement, a probe. I shrugged lightly. "It has its moments." Claire leaned back in her chair. "I can't imagine trying to live around here on a nonprofit salary," she said casually. "Rent alone is insane." Robert chimed in with a slow nod. "That's why stability matters." Then Margaret looked directly at Liam, and the next sentence wasn't really meant for me. Liam has always had certain opportunities in life," she said calmly. "We just want to make sure the people around him can keep up with that." Did you hear that? Keep up. In other words, did I belong in their world? For the first time that night, Liam shifted in his chair. "Mom," he said quietly, but Margaret kept going. "Marriage is about partnership," she continued. "Lifestyle compatibility is important." The message couldn't have been clearer if she'd written it on the wall. You might be nice, but are you good enough for our family? And right as the tension started climbing towards something explosive, Sophie spoke again, softly, completely unaware. "My mommy says being kind is worth more than money." The silence that followed was even heavier than before. Liam slowly turned toward his mother. And then he asked a question no one at that table was prepared for. "Mom, are you judging Vanessa because you think she's poor?" Margaret didn't hesitate. She answered immediately. And what she said next forced me to reveal the truth I'd been hiding all night. What do you say when someone finally says the quiet part out loud? When Liam asked his mother, "Are you judging Vanessa because you think she's poor?" The entire table seemed to lean forward, waiting for her answer. Margaret Whitmore didn't panic. She didn't backtrack. She didn't even pretend to misunderstand the question. Instead, she calmly folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. "I'm not judging," she said evenly. "I'm being realistic." Realistic. The word hung in the air. Robert nodded slightly, like that explanation made perfect sense. St. Clair stared down at her plate but didn't object either. Margaret continued. "Liam has worked very hard to build the life he has. Our family simply believes the person he marries should be able to maintain that lifestyle with him." There it was, polite, polished, but unmistakably clear. In their minds, I wasn't just a stranger at dinner. I was a risk. And suddenly the reason I had stayed quiet all night didn't feel like curiosity anymore. It felt like confirmation. So I took a slow breath. "There's actually something I should probably clear up," I said. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me. "I never told Liam I was poor." Margaret blinked. Claire's head snapped up. I continued calmly. "He assumed it because I live modestly and don't spend much money. I just never corrected him." Liam looked at me, surprised but not angry. "So, you're not struggling?" he asked. "I make $33,000 a year," I said. "It's not huge, but it's steady. And after raising Sophie on my own for 6 years, I learned how to live within my means." Silence. Real silence this time. Robert looked slightly uncomfortable. Claire suddenly seemed fascinated with her water glass. Margaret didn't speak at all, but Liam did, and what he said next surprised everyone at the table. He leaned back in his chair, shook his head slightly, and gave a quiet laugh. "You know what?" he said. "I'm actually glad you didn't tell me." Everyone looked at him. "Because now," he continued, glancing toward his mother, "I know how people treat someone they think has less." Margaret didn't respond. For the first time that evening, she had absolutely nothing to say. And as I looked around that beautiful dining room, one thing became very clear. Money hadn't revealed who I was. It revealed who they were. But what happened the next time I saw Liam's family was even more surprising than that dinner.